Hi guys.
Hello.
It's nice to have you on stage. We've got 20 minutes, and also we welcome questions from public. So if you have any, just drop them at us, and we'll try to answer questions asked. I'd like to, having such a great guests, I'd like to discuss regulatory technology. And how do you find regulatory technology importance? What is it in your view, and what role does it play in the fintech ecosystem and maybe even in digitization? So Stephanie, could you please start?
Okay, no problem at all. So RegTech, or regulatory technology, is essentially using technology to help financial institutions with compliance, compliance with regulations. And as you may know, a lot of the financial institutions have spent a lot of money on compliance matters. I think last year, financial institutions spent about $100 billion on compliance and regulatory matters. And that's just cash. There's also a lot of time and resources. And why is this? You've got more regulations, data protection, for example, cybersecurity, cross-border regulations. The list kind of goes on and on. And RegTech is here really to use technology to assist financial institutions with that compliance processes, to automate some, to perhaps use artificial intelligence or machine learning in several areas. So it could be, for example, fraud protection. It could be assisting in certifications, KYC checks. It could be in actually keeping track of data privacy changes or laws, or tracking other regulatory changes. So these are some examples of RegTech that we see, and a lot of new RegTech firms have actually set up and providing these services. But because you have a large compliance cost and large resources, RegTech is something that financial institutions are indeed looking at the moment.
And how does it regulatory technology look from Lithuanian perspective?
Thank you. So we are the supervisor and the regulator in our jurisdiction. And for us, RegTech is all about saving the costs to our supervised entities. As a central bank, we have a strategic objective for ourselves that if we want the market to embrace new technology, we need to show a good example. The best example we can do is to use those technologies ourselves. And that's very difficult to do for a public entity, all the procurement and other related matters. But the most important is the change in attitude of the supervisors. So what we did, we set a strategic goal that by 2020, we want to reduce the compliance costs of our regulated entities by 20%. The way to do that is to utilize technology so that the firms, instead of investing in compliance mechanisms on a solo basis, maybe that can be done by the regulator, where the regulator designs a method through which compliance can be done. What I mean specifically by that is instead of regulated entities submitting to us reports, they can provide access to us. I'm talking about open APIs. And the regulator would access this data on a need basis any way we want, of course, with the permission of a regulated firm. And that would reduce costs to the regulated entity. So to summarize, RegTech is nothing special. It's about using the technology which is available for the processes which we have been doing already for many years.
Yeah.
But the most important question is why regulators did not do that already? And the answer, I think, from my perspective, is because there was no need to do that.
Okay.
And the need is coming because if we don't do that, others will do that, and regulated firms, they are choosing a regulator as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting perspective and something we should probably follow in Poland, setting these very clear objectives,
Yeah.
like you've said, 20% of reduction. I'd like to go a little bit deeper. What you see the model you are going to pursue in Lithuania for regulatory technology? Are you going to cooperate with, I don't know, small companies like startups, or maybe your goal is to develop your own solution because you are public entity controlled by the state with very, very specific requirements? So,
Yes. It sounds like a very simple question, but it's not. It's almost similar to a challenge that a private company is going through. Can I outsource some of my core business to IT development firm? Can I afford that? Maybe the regulator can do that because we are not directly on the market. Yes? And that's why we are more willing to collaborate. And we have set up a specific team which is dealing with various propositions for collaboration. And there are many of them. And it's very difficult for a public entity to find a way of engaging with them. And we're still searching in a good model to do that. One way of doing that, which the term of it is sandbox. There's forms of regulatory sandboxes, because regulators also has a responsibility to maintain an equal playing field for everyone. So if he engages with one specific firm, there must be a clear framework why it is engaging with that particular firm. What is the benefit? And the benefit cannot be only mutual, it should be public. And by public, I mean that this is some innovation, some development which is shared by the society.
Okay. Maybe I can add for Singapore, and it's really quite interesting to hear. The Singapore story is also that the regulator, they call it SupTech, supervisor technology. And again, with very, very similar goals to what you've expressed, to make or to create efficiencies for financial institutions in the compliance game. And they've said, look, if you may be, we may ask you for information 3 or 4 times, right? Because a lot of it is paper-based now. And if going forward we do, that's our problem. You should be telling us you already have this information. So it's about making sure that all the data points, you've got open APIs to facilitate that communication between regulator and supervisor. And that's quite important as well.
The second thing I wanted to cover with you is sandbox and the meaning of sandbox for the whole fintech ecosystem. And you already started to covering this topic. So what is your take on sandbox? And do we really need them? And what kind of sandboxes countries, because there is a regulatory, there is industry, there is a number of models. So what is the best in your opinion, and how do you see the meaning of sandbox in ecosystems? So what do they do in your opinion?
Okay, let me talk about Asia Pacific and Singapore. A lot of the Asia Pacific countries actually have regulatory sandboxes. Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, Malaysia, Australia, etc. Now, what do they do? If you were here earlier in the session, our regulator was talking about the sandboxes, and it really is a toolbox that regulators can use to say, look, we are not going to front-run innovation. We cannot create rules which will stifle innovation. But there could be certain risks and there could be certain situations where we may need to look after these companies just to understand it a little bit more, and therefore I put you in a sandbox. You don't need to be licensed, but you need to play within certain parameters. And actually in Singapore there's one that has been graduated from the sandbox, and there's another robo-advisor, which is currently in the sandbox, which actually has machine learning, artificial intelligence deployed in the robo-advisor scheme. And that's actually been quite interesting to see. We don't have too many people in the institutions in the sandbox at the moment, because from a policy perspective, I must say, even working with clients, the regulator is actually fairly good at trying to understand innovation. And if you don't need a license, then that's fine. You go ahead first. And if you need a license, perhaps we can grant you certain exemptions. So that's a very practical approach by the regulators and the ministry, which I think the startups are fairly happy about. But again, the sandbox is a really good toolbox that the regulators may have to promote innovation and to ensure that you don't have regulations which basically stop it. Yeah.
To me, a sandbox is not some shady area or unclear area where unclear things are happening. Actually, the opposite. I think what the sandbox is all about is about getting a clear answer. Is this particular business model, this solution, this service, is this compliant? Is this something which the regulator or supervisor is happy with? So as a supervisor, I'm also interested to learn what are the new risks of new business models. I cannot wait until the moment when the government, or in our jurisdiction, European Commission says, go ahead and regulate virtual currencies. I want to be ready. But how do I get ready if I don't deal with it? So this is the place where I can also learn. I can develop the staff know-how. We can develop tools. I don't want to find myself in a situation of a tax authority where a gentleman comes to tax authority and declares his income and says, I have 2 million euros. Where did you get them from? I mined it. And the tax authority has no tools to figure out if this is justifiable income or not. It's sending a wrong message.
Because to me, sandboxes are a tool for changing the mindset. You mentioned that it is opening up the supervision for new technologies and new business models. And to me, sandbox seems like a toolbox for this specific purpose. We've got a very interesting question from public. Should there be a closer collaboration between supervision between countries? And I think some kind of regulatory accelerator, probably, some kind of cooperation for regulators and supervision, because these entities are expected to accelerate markets, innovation, and then they need to first accelerate themselves. So this is actually a very, very good question. And how do you see an opportunity in collaborating with other supervision?
I think this is a fantastic question. What we are doing, we think we are very innovative, we are solving the problems, but actually we're creating a new one. Singapore will develop their own API. In Europe, we'll have another one. Technologically, probably running on different platforms, different solutions, different technical standards. A firm, global firm operating across several jurisdictions will say, wait a second, instead of helping me, you have created a problem. So that's why I think regulators are obliged to talk to each other, to make sure that good initiatives are not single initiatives and they are somehow aligned with each other. But this is not a technology question. It's governance and geopolitics to some level.
Exactly.
And that's why we need the involvement of governments as well, not only the regulators. One point, if I can relate to the sandbox. In our consultation on sandboxes, we got the answer from the firms that that's fine. You look like a very nice regulator. But there are other agencies, like Data Protection Agency, Tax Authority, Ministry of Finance. Can you also get them on board? Because if you say it's fine, it doesn't mean anything, because other authorities haven't said so as well. So it's all about coordination.
Yeah, this is an interesting remark, because the amount of rules you have to be compliant as a business is so big that sometimes you can't be compliant to everything. And having a number of legislators and regulators in one sandbox, this seems really like something very useful. So thanks for this. So we need to be closing, and I'd like to ask you a question. If I ask you to put future of regulation, the future of regulatory environment in one sentence, what would it be? How can we summarize what expects us in the future of regulation?
Okay, let me start. I think regulation and regulators have to continuously collaborate and be part of the ecosystem for fintech. You cannot sit there and say we're just the regulators. There needs to be continuous collaboration, and this has to be reflected in the rules as well. You are looking at promoting something, but at the same time, complying with your prudential requirements as well. But continuous collaboration and being part of the ecosystem, I think that's very important.
Okay, so ongoing collaboration. Okay, and from your?
So if it has to be one sentence, it's about building a good user experience for the regulated firms from a supervisor.
Okay, so this user experience fits very well in expectation of not only businesses but also for citizens, because I believe that the future of regulation is basically future of digitization, and as from my perspective, regulation and rules, or maybe policies, because the technology has been improving and progressing so fast that sometimes you have to put together a policy instead of a law. And from our perspective, it is crucial for the innovation to develop and for the future of regulation, like digitization of regulators. This is something which will actually boost the adoption of digital service, I mean, commercial and public. So thank you very much. We've got, I didn't ask another very interesting question from our audience, and it is, what is the most advanced country in regulatory technology? So I'm very curious about that, if you could share some opinions on that.
Of course, it's Poland.
Okay. Thank you.
No?
Probably not. Probably not. And there is also a question about EU regulation, and how do you see the EU regulation and the adoption in EU countries of the rules forced by regulator at the EU level?
I guess that's a question for me.
Yes.
Yes. I think we're doing everything in the right direction, but the question is if we're doing it at good enough speed, because the rest of the world is not waiting. And if we are in Europe talking about the data privacy and the rights of citizens and so on, in some other parts of Asia, besides Singapore, there is no data privacy. It's all about cutting edge, no data privacy developments, and maybe we should look into this as well, that the regulatory burden is justified and it doesn't impede development, but also we need to preserve the values which we are living with, and maybe that's why the rest of the world is still looking up to this side of the world, because we preserve those values.
Okay, so the EU ecosystem seems to be quite an interesting field for regulatory technology to facilitate the adoption of very complicated rules. So I'm looking very much forward to development of regulatory technology here in our country, in our region. Thank you very much.